안녕하세요, 여러분. This is 77th once again, coming at you guys with another video. And I'm having to do something a little different. I don't know if you guys will be able to tell the difference, but I made this video twice, a couple days ago. And the first time I made it, after I made it and I went to play back the sound, I discovered that there was no sound. And I said, wow, okay. So I recorded it a second time and played it back, and there was no sound again. So I said, well, forget it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'll do it some other time. But I actually kept the actual, the illustration, the whiteboard, stuff that I did. I actually kept that one. So I figured, I'll just attempt to do voiceover with what I'm doing in the actual video, see how that goes. So, but aside from that, the title of the video, as you can see, is Mastering the Balance Between FE and FI. And of course, we all know that as far as, the MBTI, as far as the INFJ, FE, Extraverted Feeling, is our second function or auxiliary function. And FI, Introverted Feeling, is our sixth function. So let's talk about it. And I think it looks like I'm going to go straight for the jugular on this one. Yeah, we have some characteristics of FE. It looks like I'm illustrating the FE slave. Now, in my research and because of me being one once upon a time, we're misunderstood. Our NI is misunderstood. So what we tend to do, or what the average INFJ tends to do, is dumb down or repress our NI for the sake of FE acceptance. So what we'll do is, as INFJs, with our NI and FE, we can see into the soul, into what humans need internally to make them feel seen, to make them feel happy, things of that nature. So what we'll do is we'll focus on being that FE to humans. So, or for us, or to be, so we can be accepted. So what we say to ourselves is, well, if we make them feel seen and happy, maybe they'll like us. Maybe they'll accept us. Okay. And that would be what unawakened FE is. Like I said, that's the average INFJ. Okay. The average INFJ is walking around, you could say on a scale of 1 to 10, their NI is about maybe a 4, 4.5, maybe a 5 at most. So with that, on the flip side, you have what FE truly is, which is empathy. Pure FE is empathy. Okay, when you can be empathetic without expecting anything in return, without expecting, acceptance in return. When you are purely, empathetic, giving, loving, because it's what you want to do, because it's truly you. Or it's what pure FE, raw FE is. So, and like I said, that's what you want to focus on, being FE, because it's purely to the depth of your soul, not for acceptance. And as you can see, I've crossed out empathy, because there's a fine line between empathy for the sake of being purely FE and being an FE slave, being empathetic for the sake of acceptance. There may be a situation where, a friend or a family member, whatever the case may be, somebody treated you unfairly, hurt your feelings, purposely, I might add. And, you still help the person. Your FE still allows you to help the person move or whatever they need you to do, whatever favor they need from you, because of that fear of not being accepted by the tribe, by the family, by your friends. So your FE gives in. But what happens, and I crossed out FI because what happens with FI, it says, well, what about how they hurt our feelings? Are we still going to help them move? I mean, are you crazy, FE? What are we doing here? So the FI gets repressed, and it gets more repressed. Now, I want to get into one of the main reasons why the INFJ becomes the FE slave it becomes. And as I'm illustrating, it is because of the censor human being. The censor human being can only quantify, it can only quantify, value based off of external value. What do I mean by that? The censor will not believe that you love it if you aren't proving yourself externally to it. Like if it needs you to move, or if it needs you to help, if a censor needs you to help them move and you don't do it, they're not going to think you're very valuable. They're going to think you don't like them. If you basically SI, and if you guys don't know what SI is the law of the external world. If you are not and what I mean by that is SI is what a person should be externally, whatever that may be. That if you're 17, 18, you should be, SI says you should be in school, getting an education in high school, making A's, being on the track team, the chess club, things of that nature. That's what you're supposed to be. If you're 25, you're supposed to be fresh out of a 4-year college, whatever you're majoring in, you should have your first job or an apprenticeship or whatever the case may be. These are the things that SI values. They cannot quantify the spectrum of NI, which is NI values the depth and internalness of meaning in a human, in all things, in the universe, everything. So what makes the INFJ the FE slave is it having to prove itself to SI or SE or the censor of what it is. Okay? Whether that be helping a family or a friend move, or if a family member or a friend feels you should be doing X in your life and you're not doing it, according to SI, then you're going to be discarded. You're not going to be looked at as valuable in any way. So the FE in an INFJ will say, well, I want to be accepted. I want to be loved. So whatever you need, censor family member or a friend or whatever the case may be, I'm going to be that. I'm going to help you move. I'm going to babysit. I'm going to wash your car. I'm going to help you move. Whatever the case may be, whatever the favor may be, because like I said, us INFJs, we can look into humans and see what that value is that they want out of us and be that, aka the chameleon effect that everyone says the INFJ is. And as you guys saw me write FE and FI a couple seconds ago, let me say this. You cannot be FE and FI at the same time. You just can't. If you're FE, you're not being FI. And if you're being FI, you're not FEing. And it's the same with all the other functions. You can't be SI or SE at the same time, or TI or TE or anything like that. Now, the main culprits the main personality types that make the INFJ the FE slave that it is. Basically, your STs: ISTJ, ESTJ, ESTP, ISTP. ISTPs and ESTPs, they are SE masters. Okay? So they will be able to use their SETI or TISE to see the kindness in the INFJ, see the FE in the INFJ and how kind it is, and more or less take advantage of that FE for their benefit. And then on the flip side, we have ISTJ, ESTJ, with the INFJ's SI, TE being 7th and 8th, and thus not being strong in those areas. They're more or less going to ridicule the INFJ, saying, oh, for not being SITE or TESI as they are. And as you can see, I've also illustrated the FE-DOM too. As you can see, I've illustrated the ESFJ. I've come across a couple of ESFJ narcissists in my lifetime. And what they'll do, like I'll say this, the ESFJ is the SI police. I'll just say that. They're going to want you to be what SI wants you to be, just as they are. Upholding SI law, upholding SI standards for life, as I mentioned before. Every individual, every human being, SI believes when you're in your 20s, you should be a certain way. In your 30s, you should be living a certain life. In your 40s, you should be living a certain life. In your 50s, you should be living a certain life, and so on and so on. Our NI is very precious. As I said before, we can use our NI and FE to peer into humans and make them feel seen, make them feel happy inside. And more or less, as I've pointed out, I'm just reiterating, the ESFJ narcissist or the ST narcissist, they can take advantage, they can see that FE, they can more or less get a sense of that light and take advantage of it. And the INFJ is totally oblivious to it. And like I said, they'll just they'll just take advantage of the light. And how it works is more or less INFJs, when it comes to their heart, as I've illustrated, they will have the door or the lock on the outside of their heart, to where anyone can just walk into their heart, trample all over it, take advantage of it, things like that. Let me reiterate. The sensor, I'm not saying all sensors, but the vast majority, a good 95% of sensors, they will, mostly unconsciously, they will only see you for the external value you provide them. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay? And if you are not living up to SI standards, their SE will ridicule you for not being what you should be according to SI standards, SI society. Okay? While nobody will really care about the internal depth of what's going on with the INFJ. The personal feelings that the INFJ has, the scapegoating, the depth of the INFJ's soul, of its FI. Nobody will care. As long as you are being an FE slave and you're living up to SI standard to the best of your ability, aka putting your FE on the railroad tracks to be ran over and trampled all over, nobody will care. They won't care. Okay? And it's very unfortunate, but it's the truth. So, what happens from there? FI gets fed up. FI sees the FE slavery that's going on, and it says enough is enough. I'm not doing this anymore. If Effie, if you're not going to care about our feelings, then I'm going to bring the fight to you. I'm going to confront you. So at that point, your FI confronts your FE. And they have more or less a heart to heart. And what I mean by a heart to heart is your FI takes a baseball bat and knocks your FE over the head and drags it into the basement and locks it up. I don't know if you guys remember the movie The Punisher that came out a while ago, long time ago. And I mean, you guys can go look up the story about the Punisher, but at the end of the movie, he was going for his revenge on, the guy that murdered his family and everything like that. And he said something that was very fitting. He said, and I'm a Christian, so, but in the movie, he said, "Well, God's going to sit this one out." And in turn, in this scenario, FI goes, "Well, FE is going to sit this one out." And from there, FI takes over.
So, after FE and FI have their heart to heart, FI gets with NI and TI, and they have their own conference about everything that's going on, about FI's personal feelings versus FE slavery, about it sacrificing itself endlessly without regarding FI, the whole grand scope of things. And once NI, TI, and FI get together in that conference, that is the hallmark of the word introspection. Okay? FI, all three of these guys will get and look in the depth of their soul, or the depth of the INFJ's soul, and weigh everything, you know, whether it, be, through NI's depth, through TI's analysis, through FI's depth of its feelings. All three of these, all three of these aspects of the INFJ will get together, and they will meditate, reflect on everything that's going on, and come to a conclusion about what to do with FE. Okay, so not just FE, but everything. What to do going forward. How what is true to the INFJ's soul. What is the hallmark of their authenticity? What is true to them? So at that moment, the FI and the INFJ awakens. Okay? At that moment, the INFJ is no longer an FE slave. Its FI is awakened. It is awakened to its own existence, to its truest form, to its truest authenticity. No more FE slavery. No more FE sacrificing itself on the railroad tracks. No more people pleasing. No more narcs taking advantage of our FE. None of that is going on anymore. You have to understand, INFJs are longing for depth from another human, not just a casual relationship, not going to the movies, not hanging out at a bar. We want depth of meaning from another human. Okay? And what happens when the INFJ awakens, the male or female INFJ, um, we learn to seek and we learn to find that depth within ourselves. And at that moment, we're talking about the initiation into awakening our, well, the male INFJ awakening their anima, and the INFJ female awakening her animus. When we when we find that depth within ourselves, when we don't need depth from any other human, because let's face it, no other INFJ but me is going to tell you, you're not going to find depth of meaning in any sensor that is living on this planet now or the next 10 million years. Let me repeat what I just said. You're not going to find NI depth of meaning in any sensor that is breathing in this externalness of existence now or 10 million years from now. You're just not. I went ahead and looked up the definition of introspection, and what the internet or what Google says is it's the examination or observation of one's own mental and emotional processes. And that's exactly what's going on between NI, TI, and FI. Okay, and as you can see, catching up with the video here, like I said, no more FE slavery, no more being FE for the sake of acceptance, no more of that. You know, um, and like I said, at that moment, once FI is awakened, it what basically happens is it goes down to the basement and it has another heart to heart with FE about everything that's happened. And what happens is FE realizes the truth. Okay, so at that moment, FE is allowed to come from the basement because it sees the light. Okay, and at that moment, when you have FE seeing the light, when you have awakened FI, then you have achieved true balance between FI and FE. Okay, to where they're no longer, enemies, or they're they're no longer the odd couple. And I'm revealing my age here, talking about odd couple. So they're no longer the odd couple. You know, they're a cohesive unit. They see eye to eye. In that moment, as I said before about the INFJ's heart having that doorknob or the lock on the outside of the INFJ having it on the outside of their heart, what happens is when FE and FI achieve that balance, that door and that doorknob or that lock is on the inside of the INFJ's heart. That way they can, ask questions. They can see if that person is worthy of their NI depth, of their FE to its truest extent. And you have to understand that all this stuff that goes on with the INFJ throughout their lifetime. I mean, Carl Jung called this back in the 1940s, 1950s. Quote unquote. Well, when he said quote unquote, the introverted intuitive has a very difficult life, but also one of the most interesting lives. Quote, in, quote unquote. So, it's this is one of the aspects of that difficult life. You know, overcoming FE slavery. That is one aspect of the INFJ's life that they will have to go through. Overcoming FE slavery for the sake of acceptance is what I'm saying. So, you know, being able to reflect and introspect on a person's life, to even be aware that, the scapegoating, the FE being on the railroad tracks, the FE worrying about acceptance, all this takes place over an INFJ's lifetime. And more or less, they're not going to be aware of this or awaken to these aspects until they're in their 40s. If you're lucky, early 30s, maybe mid 30s, if you're lucky. But definitely, later, more your late 30s, early 40s, and so on, is when you're going to awaken to these things. I mean, I've been on, YouTube and social media, and I've read comments. There are INFJs well into their 60s. They don't awaken to all this until they're well into their 60s. I'm gonna tell you guys a story about my own experience with FE and FI. One day I went into a restaurant, because I had an order to pick up, and I saw, an older lady that worked at the restaurant, and she didn't look like she was having, the best of days. So, of course, we both said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Hello," stuff like that. And I said, "Is everything okay? How are you?" And she said, "I've had better days, and and she seemed like she was busy, helping other customers and everything. So I picked up my order and I was leaving. But as I was leaving, from me going into the restaurant to the car, my FI and FE, they were kind of both saying, you know, hey, let's go talk to her some more, tell her something encouraging, or something like that. Say a prayer for her, something like that. Give her a hug. So, and I say FE and FI because my FI wanted to do the same thing as my FE. Like I was talking about the cohesion between the two, both of them being in sync. So I went back in and I told her, you know, pardon me, but I just wanted to tell you that, whatever's going on, I hope it turns around and I hope you have a better week and that I'll be praying for her, and you know, she was very appreciative of that. She said, thank you, that's so sweet. I really needed that. You made my day. And, that made me feel good, and as I'm walking out, you know, I could feel my FE, being overwhelmed with joy that I helped somebody purely from the bottom of my soul. So, and it so much so that it brought tears to my eyes. So, I just wanted to tell you guys, that's more of what it's like with the INFJ when it comes to the balance between our FE and FI. Okay, so yeah, with that, please comment if you guys find the video insightful. And yeah, this is 70 Severance signing out.